Hello and welcome to a new edition of True Audio Files. Today, as you can tell by the title, I am going to be doing a sound quality shootout with the first 5 ZZ Top albums. The biggest reason, if you don't already know, which I would assume you do because you're watching this video, and I can't see you watching this video otherwise, is that Rhino just recently released a high fidelity box set of the first 5 albums, which I have right here. Mine is numbered 1471 out of 2000. But the good news about, the interesting thing, I should say, or not interesting thing, because it's not all that surprising, they only made 2,000 copies. And basically they got sold out within probably a couple days of them being announced and put on the website. The good news is that Rhino has just released unnumbered, I want to say there's 5,000 copies of each album individually, so you could buy them individually. So you're not going to get the box, you're not going to get the limited numbered editions, you're not going to get the ever so popular slip mat that came with the box set, but you're going to get essentially the same pressings. It's maybe the second pressing or whatever it might be, but you're getting the same mastering, same cut, done by Kevin Gray, I believe still pressed at Optimal in Germany. So essentially the same record minus the couple of extras that you would get with the box set for about the same price if you wanted to buy them all. So that's a big reason. I was kind of contemplating whether I should really do a review since they're hard to come by, but I think now is even a better time to do this, and I've done them individually to do a sound quality shootout individually of them to kind of figure out maybe which ones are worth investing in and which ones may not be worth investing in, if that's a possibility at all. So I think how I'm going to approach this is usually I go in pretty good detail on each individual record, but I think I'm going to do kind of a clipped version, edited version of this, and kind of just go and talk general specifics about them, just so it doesn't take up an hour of a video to go into detail about these. So, but I will start off by showing you which pressings I am going to be going to basically do the A/B comparisons on for each individual album. So, for their first album, which is interestingly titled ZZ Top's first album, I have this London copy, which is, I believe, if it's not a first pressing, it's a very early pressing. It actually still has the, well, I shouldn't say still, because I'm guessing many of the early pressings still have the London label on it. So I've got that for the first ZZ Top album. For the second ZZ Top album, something similar. I've got what I believe is a first or early pressing of this, which again has the London label on it, as you can see. And then for the next two, these ones were interesting. So if you didn't know, I'm guessing a lot of you do if you've watched this, but if not, something you may know or may not know is that Steve Hoffman and Kevin Gray being the one who cut the new Rhino high fidelities, by the way, did some reissues back, I don't know, it was maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that. But basically, Steve Hoffman, for those of you who don't know, is really well regarded as someone who really does a great job of getting a great sounding reissue, remastering of titles. Probably his most famous one, or the one I feel he's most famous for, is the first Van Halen album. That's considered by many one of the best sounding versions of it. It was far superior to anything that came out before it. But anyways, so him and Kevin Gray, Steve Hoffman mastered, EQ'd, if you will, the titles, and Kevin Gray cut them to vinyl. So there's Tres Hombres, which this one is a actually green colored vinyl, so kind of cool there. And yeah, if you were quick to see that, I actually only paid like $22 for this when it first came out. I'm not even sure what they go for now. They're probably pretty pricey because of how well regarded the mastering engineers on it are. But anyway, so I've got that one, and then I've got Fandango as well. Again, EQ'd by Steve Hoffman, lacquers cut by Kevin Gray. Now I also have, and I'm not even sure how I came across this. I think I must have found it in a bin at a thrift shop, like a Goodwill, but I found a open, just kind of sitting there version of Fandango with no cover or sleeve. And this appears to be a pretty early pressing. It was actually cut by Rob Ludwig, or Bob Ludwig, Robert Ludwig, of Led Zeppelin 2 fame. So done not pretty in a pretty similar time frame era too. But anyways, so Robert Ludwig cut early pressing, if not first pressing. Kind of beat up, but it was still in good enough condition to where I could really hear and do a good A-B comparison. And then for the last option, I have, it's Tejas. And again, I think this is a first/early pressing. This is a London, and it's actually got a similar label design to the Fandango one, which they take the cover art and sort of kind of mimic it to a certain degree on the label. But it's a London copy. One thing that I will say that, and now that I've shown you all the different ABs I'm going to do, one thing I was somewhat disappointed with, I mean, I think the jackets and the gatefolds that they make these, I'll show you if I can bring one out here, these albums out. I think they do a great job because they're super high quality gatefolds. They've got an OB on them, but also, the nice gatefolds. They give you a lot of the artwork, and that's typically maybe on the inner sleeves and things like that. And they also give you a very cool insert that has what appear to be the master tapes, and they show them, and then some essays and things like that about each album. So each one of the albums has one of these. I will say, however, the one thing that I was kind of disappointed about, and makes me glad that I actually have the original version of Tejas, is there's a lot of the artwork from that album is missing on the Rhino version, which I was very disappointed to see. And let me see if I can pull that out here for you. You might see a edit here, so give me a minute while I put stuff in. All right, so here's the Tejas vinyl from the box set, and again, they kind of do the same thing where this is actually on the inner sleeve on the Tejas original early pressings, and again they have the master tapes that they put in here, and then there are some more pictures and an essay in here as well. Problem is, they don't have the original artwork. So what I really thought was very cool about Tejas, and I'm assuming this is early/first pressing, is it's kind of got a trifold in here, which has big headshots of the three guys. So you've got this picture, which I don't believe is in that other one. So you got a cool trifold of the three guys in the band that are not in the Rhino High Fidelity Edition version. So I'm kind of disappointed that they did that, they omitted that. So sort of kind of a minor dig, but I think it's kind of sad that they didn't do that, especially if they're charging you $40 for these releases. So all right, so here's kind of my overall take on them. So when comparing them to the early pressings, what I've noticed mostly about the differences between the two, and there may be some subtle differences here and there beyond what I'm saying here, but soundstage seemed to be very similar between the early pressings versus the Rhino. The biggest differences that I noticed is the EQ, and the biggest one being there's definitely more treble in the Rhino high fidelity versions. I think that they definitely make a big difference in the overall perception of sound, of clarity anyways, and I feel they definitely sound like a clearer version of the albums. on my system anyways. That is obviously just, that part is subjective, but the objective observation is definitely that there's more treble. I don't think there's quite enough treble on the original pressings on most of them. Some of them actually didn't have quite as much bass either as the Rhino, or deep a bass. But that wasn't as big of a difference. But there was certainly a noticeable difference in the high frequencies on the high fidelities, and they all were, even though the early pressings were relatively quiet, although all of my Rhino high fidelity ones were definitely a quieter pressing, so that's an advantage as well. But people who are probably not big treble guys, that really don't like what a lot of these audiophile reissues do, where they add more treble onto them, is I could see the argument where some of you, especially in your particular environments and your settings, I could see where maybe the high fidelities by Rhino have maybe a little bit too much treble, and if they notched it down a little bit but still had more than the originals, it would probably be a good happy medium. But that's kind of my take. I think overall, when you're talking about first early pressings versus the Rhino high fidelities, the Rhino high fidelities, to me, I felt sounded clearer. The pressings were definitely quieter, but there was definitely more treble versus the original pressings. Now, the Fandango, which, and I'll get into the Steve Hoffman versions as well here in a second, but the Steve Hoffman one was kind of interesting because it definitely didn't have quite as much treble, but it was definitely not shy on the treble by any stretch, in my opinion. But I thought the Robert Ludwig one sounded really good. I thought the bass was pretty similar. Soundstage was pretty similar. The Robert Ludwig one actually had probably a little tiny bit more mid-range, so it kind of had a little bit of a warmer feel to it. So that one, I think, of the early pressings that I have, I think that one sounded the closest to the high fidelities and gave the high fidelities a run for their money. And if you have a great copy of that by Robert Ludwig, and you were looking to get these in replacement, I'm not sure if there's enough of a difference to quantify that, because the Robert Ludwig one sounds really good. So when it comes to the Hoffman ones, there's definitely a clear difference between the two. The Rhino high fidelities, getting back to kind of what I was talking about before, definitely have a little bit more treble than the Hoffman ones. The Hoffman ones are definitely not treble shy, though. I think that they're probably have a slight bit more than the original early pressings, at least the Fandango, the only one I have, because I don't have a earlier first pressing of Tres Hombres. But anyway, so that was one thing I noticed. You definitely get a decent amount of clarity. I think that there's definitely more treble though on the high fidelities. The bass, when it comes to the bass, though, that's where the biggest difference and the biggest noticeable difference is. There's definitely more kind of a mid-bass, lower mid-range on the Steve Hoffman ones. So that is, again, Tres Hombres and Fandango. And how that really comes across, it really depends on your system. I actually did demo Tres Hombres at my brother's house, which you may have seen some earlier videos of mine where we did a shootout from his house. One thing that I did notice on one of his systems is that the Rhino definitely sounded a little too bright and didn't seem like it's as powerful as the Steve Hoffman. And the Steve Hoffman definitely had that kick where you kind of feel the bass in your chest type of a feel to it. When I played it on my system, you definitely had that feeling, although I got the feeling on my system that the bass may have felt maybe a little bit bloated in comparison to the high fidelities, because the high fidelities on both of those, the bass was really good on them. And I would say the deep bass was probably pretty similar on those in comparison to the Steve Hoffman. It's that upper bass, maybe lower mid-range area where he puts a little bit more into it to kind of give you that punch, maybe warm up the vocals and the guitar a little bit more, which that's kind of a nice touch, especially on the guitar work. It kind of gives you more of a richness to the guitar maybe. I think soundstage wise and things like that, they're pretty similar though. So I guess it really depends on your feeling and what you feel about bass and how your system produces that bass too. I would have to imagine that if I could listen to these in my car system, for example, maybe the Hoffman ones would come across as a punchier, more kick you in the chest feel on the bass than the high fidelity ones, but the high fidelities are definitely no slouch when it comes to the bass. And I would also say that the Hoffman on Fandango, this is where it really made a difference, because one of the drawbacks to Fandango in general is the live recordings. They have virtually no bass drum at all. I mean, I don't even think I could hear it on either copy. So it's kind of interesting if you look at that for Fandango. I think that also one of the things I noticed on Fandango is I think that the Steve Hoffman one maybe is more of a psychological thing, but it gave the appearance of maybe a little bit of a deeper sound stage than the Rhino. But I feel that I liked the live side better on the Steve Hoffman, but the studio side of Fandango on the Rhino High Fidelity. And for those of you who don't know, Fandango, I'm kind of repeating myself, but Fandango, the first side is live stuff. The side B is studio stuff. So I guess, so that's one of those things that you want to take into consideration as well if you're looking to get that one. So I would say overall, the box set or the individual pieces, ones that are now available, it's pretty hard to say that they can't stand toe to toe with any other pressing that's out there. And I would say overall, they're probably the best ones that I have. Maybe in certain circumstances, other ones give a slight edge. Like the Fandango one is a prime example. There are certain things I like about all three versions, and if I can kind of get all three of them put together, I'd have a win. Like, maybe if there's a little bit less upper bass, lower mid range on the Steve Hoffman, and maybe a little bit more of the kind of mid range that the Robert Ludwig one has, and maybe just a slight bit of a drop in the treble in the high fidelity, but maybe a little bit more than the other two had. I think I'd have a winning combination. But sadly, I can't have that because of it's just what it is. Maybe there's another copy out there if you guys know of that gives you all three of those things together in one package. Let me know in the comments section because I'd really like to know. So anyway, that's kind of my take. I think the Rhinos, they did a great job on these. I think that of the ones I've listened to, of the ones I've been able to compare, the Rhinos in most cases were definitely the best version that I own, and I would not hesitate to recommend them to anybody. They're definitely going to be the quietest of all the ones that I have, so that's kind of a good news as well. Even though none of the ones that I have were incredibly noisy, so I want to stress that too, except for my first or early pressing of Fandango, just because it was beat up and scratched up, and I cleaned it as best I could, but there's only so much you can do for that. So I think a clean copy of that would still be probably pretty clean and pretty quiet, relatively speaking. So, but Rhino High Fidelities definitely were the quietest. I think in many cases they were the best, and if they weren't the best, there were elements to them that made them better, in my opinion, and you will not be disappointed with any of them. So if you want to go out and get the individual albums, there should be still available. They were as of me post or recording this. So now you can get the ones that you want that you maybe don't have. Like maybe if you really like the Hoffman ones, just get the first album, Rio Grande Mud and Tejas maybe, and you'll be in good shape. But and then quite frankly, I don't know. The Tejas definitely sounded better on the Rhino, but not by much. It was very, 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 very close. Probably the closest of all of them. And I do like the album artwork better on the original. So take that for what you will. Maybe get the first two albums if you already have the Hoffmans, and you'll be super happy. So that is everything I have to say about the subject. I'd really love to hear your input. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you have the Rhinos, and do you have the other copies I have, or maybe you have some other ones that I didn't get to do an A/B on? And I'd really love to hear your input and get your thoughts on what versions of the album are your favorites. So that's everything I've got for this episode. So I want to thank you very much for watching. I want to say have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Thanks a lot.